Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Papillon. I am an artist, songwriter, rower. This is Mark Allen.
Hello.
He is both a sync agent and a music supervisor, and a funny guy. Maybe he'll tell you some funny stories.
Maybe. Hey, easy. It's not
Right.
guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed. It's not part of the program. This is John Mullane. He is everything.
A thing.
Yeah.
A person.
Dad.
Dad rock.
Songwriter,
Hashtag
producer, composer. We've worked together on a couple things. Super talented, beautiful singer. Yeah. Oh, so we're going to talk to you about basically just pitching songs and we were just talking about where we should let this conversation go, and I think we're just going to kind of let it go where it needs to and tell stories. And if you guys have questions, of course, let us know. Can I get a sense of, are there artists in the room this morning? Nice. Cool. And how many of you are working with sync agents or would like to work with sync agents?
That's everyone.
Wait, I should have said, how many are working with sync agents, publishers, that kind of thing? Okay, but everybody would like to. That's great. Those are good goals.
You tackle Mark on the way out.
Yeah.
I'm going to sprint for the door. So,
So, Mark, do you want to elaborate on what you do a little more?
Yes.
Or?
yeah. So I'm originally from London, and I now live in New York. And basically, I've worked in supervision and licensing for nearly 7 years, maybe more. Yeah, who knows? And within that time, I basically worked for a company in London that did both music supervision and sync pitching, which is relatively unusual. Most of the time, supervisors are usually just have no ties to any catalog. But the company I worked for, there were no conflicts, and it just kind of was a good way of working. And it's just as the company grew, we moved into doing trailer music supervision. And then when I moved to the US, I started working more in advertising, commercials, still do trailers. And then on the sync pitching side, I'm just pitching across, film, TV, online, games, kind of anything that comes my way. So, yeah.
And have you got a roster of artists?
Yeah,
or?
so I work with a few companies, and then as I've kind of moved into freelance, I've started to take people on directly, just because I've built up all my contacts, and it just kind of makes sense. Especially once you kind of know what you're doing, you don't necessarily need the support of a company behind you. But there's definitely pros and cons to that, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I work for a couple of people, and then I kind of just pick and choose.
Cool. I call myself an artist and a songwriter. So there's my artist career as Gabrielle Papillon, and I sing and perform my own songs and release my own songs. And I have a sync agent who is pretty great, and I've worked with them for a long time. And then I'm also a songwriter, so that involves a lot of different songwriting scenarios and a lot of co-writing. So on some days I'm writing for sync specifically with a producer, another songwriter, and we just are sort of writing to have this song in what's called a song reel. We each have our song reels, and he's got a publisher, and say I've got a sync agent, and so then the song is actually being pitched by sort of two different people on behalf of the artists. And I write with other artists for their projects, and I'm writing a musical. Yeah.
Professionally, you're being paid to write a musical.
Yeah.
That's great.
Nice.
Do you want me to talk about me for a second?
Yes, that's why I looked at you.
That was the nod. I'm an artist. I started a band years ago called In-Flight Safety, and we, in a lot of ways, we made a career out of film and TV and ad placements. It was something that the type of music we made lended itself, I think, pretty well to that world. So we've done quite a few syncs over the years, and I've worked independently as my own label and manager, and often worked with music supervisors directly because they liked that because it cut out the middleman. And we could easily clear the rights to our music. So a big thing for music supervisors is they need to know they can clear something very quickly if they need to, because things happen sometimes very fast. I'll let Mark speak more to that. It's just an interesting anecdote. And further to that, I signed a publishing deal in 2010 with my band. with Rough Trade and a company called Bank Robbers. Hi, Julia. I know that's Julia. And one of our people are here, so you could probably talk to Julia a little bit about that.
Bombard her with your music.
She works at our publishing company, so that has been very lucrative for us, and we've had lots of wonderful placements, and that has been a big hallmark of me being able to be professional for this long. Further to that, I'm a writer, do some co-writing, and a producer, and I often do composing for film, TV, and ads as well. So you can hit me up with any questions that we don't cover after.
Yeah, I just realized I should have. Yeah, so as an artist, I also have had some songs placed. Not as many as John. He sent me his list. It's a long list.
Someone's got to pay for that trailer on the van.
Yeah. Right. So I had some questions, and I'm going to look them up now. So first of all, how do you find artists do you deal directly with artists who pitch stuff to you directly, or do you mostly go through sync agents and publishers as a music supervisor?
Yeah. So with my music soup hat on, it varies. I mean, especially having done conferences and stuff, and obviously meeting lots of different people, lots of different bands. I think it depends entirely on what kind of projects you work on. Obviously, everybody's working on different stuff. The majority of the ad campaigns I work on, they want just very, very well known. Usually the brief is something like it needs to be, Jay-Z level of band, but it needs to be unreleased and it needs to have this lyric that fits this ad. So it's obviously just these really ridiculous tasks that you have to do. But I would say the majority of them, they want something well known, or they want something, like kind of neoclassical. Like, I mean, I'm just talking about the ones I've kind of worked on. And then I would say I definitely focus on publishers and record labels and sync agents that I know well, usually people that I've met in person. There is, and I mean, it comes up a lot, but trust is something that's discussed a lot, and it's kind of, I think people really underestimate just what it actually means. So I talk to a lot of other supervisors, and especially people that work in TV, where there's a lot of clearing, a lot of admin, and you're trying to deal with people who sometimes are very unprofessional. People think they're being very professional by saying, "Oh yeah, I own all my music," and like they think they know they think they've got everything in order, but often they haven't, or they're signing off on things that they actually can't sign off on, or they've got producers who it's all on handshake deals, or someone like Barry played tambourine, and I'm going to have to chip him some money, but then he's going to crawl out the woodwork because you're going to land like a huge ad, and then he doesn't get a cut of it. So there's all these different things, and like I think people don't read their agreements they sign. Like if they sign a record deal in Germany and they don't read that it has sync rights taken out, and that means that you can't sign off for the world. So there's all these different cases where, for me, it's very much about a trust thing, and I'll go to people that I know. If I say to them like, do you have this one stop? Do you own all the rights? They're actually going to be telling the truth. Just because we've got no time to be messing around. We had so many. I mean, on my sync side, we've had so many things fall through because people just don't have their kind of shit together in terms of samples and co-writers and majors being involved and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, it's very long-winded, but yeah.
I think that was, you brought up some really good points. One thing that you brought up that I thought would be good to mention is having all those things. If you are an independent artist and you are going to deal directly with a music supervisor, say you're at a conference, you've developed a relationship with them, and you're comfortable doing that, there are some things you should have in order, and John will be able to speak to this as well. Things like having your instrumentals ready. If it's a co-write, making sure that the person you've co-written with, either they or their publishing company, is going to be easy to contact and communicate because these things happen really quickly. And also, you want to have that conversation beforehand with that person. Like, I'm going to be pitching this, or my company's going to be pitching this for me. Are you cool with that? Do you have any, some people are like, I don't want anything that has to do with don't pitch this for anything that has to do with guns. Mm-hmm. It's good to know that stuff.
And I think people lose touch. I mean, we have this with some of the, people lose touch with artists, lose touch with people, and then it gets really difficult because you're trying to track people down, that you've lost touch with, and that can be really kind of irritating as well.
Yeah, and the record label thing is also really interesting because I have the same deal with my label where they have to sign off on a song being placed. And so, everybody I've had meetings with this week, I've said, they're like, oh, you have a label. Is it complicated? And, for me, in my case, the answer is no, it's really not complicated. But, if you have a team or you have other people either on the song or involved somehow or a producer, you really need to make sure before you're doing this stuff that that song is going to be good to go, because you can really sort of tarnish your reputation. If a song is this close and then something happens that's out of your control that you couldn't have predicted.
Maybe I should I'll just break down some rights for people, because there's a lot of students and stuff here. So just to make it really simple, there's a couple rights you need to know about if you're going to pitch your songs for sync and to film television ads. So if you are writing the song with your bandmates or whomever, you are a co-writer. You are basically, if you don't have a publisher, you are the publisher. So it's something to think about like that, because a lot of people don't have publishers. Actually, none of them do out there today. So you guys need to think about, okay, well, we're a publishing entity because you are the writer. You're not really a publisher, but you're going to act as the publisher. So that's the publishing side. That's the sync side. And then someone will have to represent the master side in your band because you paid for the recording to be made. So that's the person who would probably own the master. Typically, we'd need a lawyer to really decide if that's fair, but that's just a rule of thumb. So if you've self-produced the work and paid for everything, then you probably are representing the master. And those two rights are the rights that get paid when you put a song in a film or a TV or ad, something like that. So that's just the basics of it. And eventually you'll seek out a publishing company, and they will represent half of the sync side. So the writers and the publisher will be 50%, and then the master will be over here, which is still the label or you personally if you paid for it. So that's just a little primer. I think that's important for you guys to understand.
I think also within sync, I think a good way of explaining it is with covers. So if you record a cover, it's your master, or whoever paid for the master. It's your version of that song, but you didn't write that song, so you don't own any composition in that sense. So that's kind of a good way of understanding these two sides, because especially people who are just, if you're a singer-songwriter and you're doing everything yourself, it's hard to understand that these are two separate rights that can be owned by two separate companies who are literally can't necessarily talk to each other on other sides of the planet. There's all these different things, and it's definitely a bit confusing when you first, and even sometimes in films, you're clearing just the publishing because maybe someone's singing the song, and that's a way of avoiding paying a master fee, or if the master is going to be quite difficult to clear if it's like a famous famous track. So there's things like that as well.
That's really cool description, because that does show you how the rights break down, and you guys need to understand that. And they also know that they pay equally usually for each right, so you get paid twice. So if you own both of those, you're the writer and you've produced the master as an independent artist, because the lens today a little bit is about it being independent. You own both those rights, so you get paid twice. So it can be a good way to get your career up and running.
The concept of paying for the recording is, I think, really important to think about, especially if you're writing with other people, or say you have a friend who records the demo for you. If you don't have that conversation and that song gets pitched and that person did the demo or the track for you for free, technically they paid for the recording. I don't know if that's actually legal, but that could be an issue.
Right.
And it's definitely been a thing with me where I'm working. There's a fellow I work with in the UK, and we work in the studio that is in his publishing company's building. So technically, all the songs we write on those days, they own the majority of the master. They give us a portion, and that's something that's cleared beforehand. But it's really important to know that, because you'll get this offer for something, and then you'll realize, oh, you get a percentage of a percentage of a percentage, and then there's all these other people you have to talk to. I think it's pretty great, actually, but it's really important to sort of know what you're getting into going into it.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And I think with especially there's obviously a lot of terminology in sync licensing. we often talk about per side, and we're talking about these different concepts. So per side, you're talking about master publishing, and then the term all in, it just means the total fee. So especially when you're getting quotes or you're getting requests in, it can be sometimes confusing if you don't understand, because it just varies. Sometimes people will, so for example, if I'm working in advertising and I'm going out and getting quotes, if it's a big song, it's going to have someone publishing, someone on the master. So I'm talking in per side because the record label is not entitled to anything this publisher has. So we're talking about per side rather than all in. And when they're quoting, they're talking in sides. So you've got to double that fee. There's things like that where it definitely gets confusing if you don't, if you see this per side and you don't really understand because they're talking about it's going to be a double what they've said, things like that.
And just a quick note that per side means like the side that we were talking about is publishing and co-writers over here and the master recording over here. That's all that means. So we were just talking about that earlier, just to kind of connect the two ideas.
I was thinking we could talk a little bit about, because we all sort of do two things, like we wear two hats. So maybe we could talk about ways that can be advantageous, like working both as a music supervisor and as a sync agent must have its benefits, and working as a producer as well as a songwriter, composer.
Yeah, I mean, on my side, you get to go to a lot of events, which is very helpful because as a sync agent, you get to go to all the supervisor events and vice versa, and that's obviously very helpful. You get to meet a lot of people that way. I think it definitely helps you kind of understand the supervisor's role better. I mean, people that pitch supervisors feel like they know what a supervisor does, and they feel like they've really got it totally like nailed. And I think people don't realize, like, it's just, especially in the US, in North America, it's so much admin. Just there, I think very little time is actually spent, listening to songs or going through new releases or, watching something to picture. That's actually just a very small percentage of it. So yeah, I think it definitely helped me, over the years to understand about, if someone sends me a brief, I'm going to respond to it as quickly as I can with not a ton of songs. Like I have certain people that I'll go to with my supervision hat on who, say they have really good French catalog or really good connections in that sense. I'll go to them and I kind of dread going to them because they're going to send me like 60 songs and I just can't believe like they have a job and things. Or on the flip side, you contact a major and they're like, oh, have you heard of this song? It's called I Like It by Cardi B. And I'm like, yeah, funnily enough, I have heard that song, which I think has been number one for a while. They're like, oh, it's going to be really, let me know because it's going to be really complicated and expensive to clear. And I'm like, yeah, no, funnily enough, I probably guessed that because it's probably got 8 writers on it, if not more. So it's things like that where it's just helpful to kind of understand how people, I mean, for me, it's like if I get a brief, I'm going to respond to it as quickly as I can. If someone says they want one-stop stuff, or I'm going to pitch stuff that I know is going to clear. Like I work with artists where they're not going to be difficult. Like if someone comes to me with a fee, I'm not going to start messing around asking for more money or saying that someone else is involved. Or what I often do is I help. So say I only have one side of the song and someone else has it. If it's like a smaller label or a manager, I'll work, I'll work behind that. What am I talking about? I'll work behind what's going on and I'll deal with that manager to clear their side, and then I'll take that back to the supervisor as like a packaged thing, being like, this is cleared, speak to this guy for the license, rather than trying to loop someone else in who's going to start messing around. That's kind of just how I've done it, just because when you're dealing with people that aren't as professional or don't deal with these, you don't want to kind of have them mess it up for you. So that's what I do.
I imagine there's a level also of like, because you wear the music supervisor hat, you get to know other supervisors in that capacity, and so then approaching them as a sync agent probably it sort of gives you that little bit of legitimacy.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think sometimes people get a bit confused, especially in New York where I'm living now. A lot of the bigger supervisors are normally independent. They normally have no ties to any catalog, so they often are a bit like, well, hang on a minute, don't you just pitch what you rep to your, supervision briefs? And I don't. Like I work on the ads, and the ads, I never have anything that's going to work for the ads I work on. When I was doing trailers, again, didn't really have much stuff. And if I do land something, I won't take a commission, or I'll work out a way that I'm not kind of double dipping. It happens a lot in Europe. Like this is European supervisors. It seems to just be totally normal to take a finder's fee. which can vary from anywhere from 5%, 10%. But you're talking about a European ad. It can be tens of thousands of euros, dollars, whatever. So it can be. It's just good to have transparency. Like again, that's why people come to me. They know I'm not going to turn around and say, "Oh, I need to take a chunk of that." Because often supervisors in Europe will take a chunk off the license fee, and they'll take that. It's the idea that we're landing it together, and that often doesn't go down so well with a lot of people because why should they get $20,000 for finding placing a song?
I am going to switch to John, but really quickly, do people know what a brief is? I mean, I know some of you do because I can see music supervisors in the room and publishers, but anyone know what a brief is when we talk about that? Hands? No? No one. Cool. We should explain that because we keep talking about it. So a brief is like I don't know if it's the music supervisors or the directors or producers, but usually I will get a thing that says looking for a song that sounds like Radiohead's Creep, but not Radiohead's Creep because that's too expensive and we couldn't clear it. But with that vibe, and it's for a scene. Sometimes it's really specific. It's like, I got one once that was like it's a zombie. It's like a new zombie TV show, and it's the end of the not the trailer, the pilot, and they're all leaving the city, and we want like this type of song. And so, then you're like, if they're like, it's, they want like a metal song, I would not submit for that. But yeah, you'll get something descriptive like that, or there can be, you've probably seen a lot of commercial briefs come in.
Well, because I work with Julia, they see the briefs. I guess you guys don't send those to us usually. Because the catalog, and so the briefs go to the publisher, and they go, well, this In-Flight City song might work for the scene. And a bunch of other songs will go along with that. And when I work in advertising, it's different. I get the brief directly. So I usually, I'll just break it down quickly. Sometimes I pitch for advertisements. Advertisements are very complex and hard to ever get your music in an ad as a writer, like as a composer, because there's so many people involved. And the way that it works usually is you've got the client, which might be Toyota or Honda, and then you've got the advertising company, which would be a big advertising firm in Toronto or New York. And then you've got some music supervision company that you probably work for, and then there's the writer in the studio. Further to that, they usually get, I don't even know the number, it could be they get 10 writers to work on that one ad, and you don't know the other writers. They're just across Canada doing this stuff. So you've got 30 seconds to write, you get a brief, and your music supervision company or music services company will just give you the brief, and you write that stuff. And it's really, really tricky because you've got to hit these marks, and you really don't even know what they want. And when there's so many people involved, very frequently it changes within hours after you submit it. So, but that is cool because I do that kind of work because you get paid to write that 30 seconds of music. So you do get paid a fee called a demo fee. And that's a really good gig. I have a few friends who do that. And it's good for me because I'm writing all the time and trying new techniques in the studio. But it's talking to a friend of mine recently, you'll land 1 in 30. That's kind of the ratio, if you're lucky. And then you get a bump, and you don't own the master in this situation. You just get a little bump of fee if the song does make it into an ad, and that's because the music services company is paying you, and they're facilitating all this. So you're just basically an employee. So in a way, it's like you're working for hire. It's like writing for hire, and I do a bit of that as well for CTV and Bell Media. So I just write songs that are 2-minute long based on a description that they send me, and I just give them, I sell them away. So I sell all the rights but my writer's share. And that's how I make a living too. So.
And you can start to build up a catalog as well. Like that's what a lot of companies and composers end up doing. You can just start to build up a little roster of what you've got going on, because ads are very cyclical. Like they'll come back around and it's going to be very similar, or you can just edit something that you worked on. And I have a lot of composer friends that just do a lot of that, especially if they're really slammed with other stuff. They'll just dig out something that they wrote and they'll just like tweak it a little bit. And I think it's happening more and more with a lot of the music houses I know in New York. They'll get contacted by agencies and they'll just say, hey, have you got anything in your back catalogue, because we haven't got any time or we don't want to spend any money getting someone to demo. So that kind of is happening a lot more and more.
Yeah, so there's work out there to write music for libraries. It was a little taboo years ago, but it's far more common. and logical when you need to pay rent, that you need to sell your music. So I've seen people who are against writing for libraries over the years now doing it as one of the things they do. And one of the things that's changed with library music is it went from kind of being like bleep, 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 elevator music to like they want sort of authenticity from artists who have been on the road and stuff like that. So it really is a boon for people like yourselves who are out there writing from the feet up with your own ideas. And that stuff is very valuable to Mark's industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I think the amount of money that they're spending on production music now is incredible. Like I was just sent an album which a library worked on for 9 months, which was of covers, obviously trailer covers, and they went to Eastern Europe and recorded with a 69-piece orchestra because there's just so much money to be made in that realm. So I think there's things, and nowadays I think even in the last 5 years, library music has come on. And it's you can get really good music very cheaply. Sometimes a lot of the clients I work with just need like really, really, really cheap music. So and it's really painful, obviously, going through the libraries because there's so much crap. But there's occasionally you'll get this gem, and sometimes sometimes you don't need anything complicated. Like I just did some social spots for this wine company, and they just really wanted like someone strumming a guitar, basically. So we used a very, very cheap library. Which I would rather not do that, but that's just where their head was at. So. And
you've seen a shift from library music, like I said, being like jingle, like you kind of think dads in a studio. I'm a dad in a studio, but writing jingles, like the Seinfeld theme and stuff like that. But it's changed a lot. It's become a little more like just express yourself. You have 2 minutes to do this, and then you get a few notes on the songs, then you can make money doing that.
I was just thinking about how being a producer and learning how to engineer essentially is a really useful, not that everyone has to go out there and do it because, I'm doing it, but it's like, it's boring. However, I think it's like an incredibly, incredibly useful thing to know how to do. And I was thinking about that time that I got a brief and I had to sort of sing this thing really quickly. And so I sang it on my phone, sent it to my sync agent, who sent it to the music supervisors, who were like, yeah, this is great. Okay, send us a thing. And then I was like, I don't, what, John? And so I texted John and got into studio. But, the reality is, and John is a great and good friend, and he won't do this for everyone, but, he cut me a deal, didn't charge me his normal rate. And we just did a really simple recording, but over time, it's become apparent, even if I find it very tedious and boring, that it's really easy to get like fairly inexpensive recording material and to just learn how to do a really clean, especially for like, there are so many, like a lot of TV is using, really simple guitar and piano and one vocal type of music. And so that's something that's relatively easy to do. So if you can sort of figure out, there are other angles, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, if you can sort of expand beyond, like, artist or songwriter, if those things interest you, those are really useful tools to have in your toolbox as, a writer sort of wanting to get into this.
I think it's an essential tool, to be honest, for modern artists to have at least one person in your band or one friend who's a part of your collective, like friends who are helping your band or your act to be able to record well. And I know I've had to do that with certain artists I work with. I'm like, have to send them away to work on vocals on their own. And we did that with Natalie's stuff. I'm like, just go and work on them. And luckily she's an engineer as well. She's trained in that stuff. But because then you can get more out of your projects. You can get way more if there's multiple people working at the same time. And it's a great way to be able to get ideas out for this kind of stuff too. So I think it's an essential tool, and I always recommend people learn how to do it.
Yeah, and it's really like there's a lot of stuff out there. Like you just YouTube something, and you figure out how to do the thing. Or
I think especially I think the one thing that a lot of up and coming artists struggle with is obviously production value, and that's definitely something that comes up with when I'm taking on indie artists. It's like sometimes the recordings just aren't good enough for TV, film, and sometimes it's just whether it's mixing or mastering or whatever. But very, very often that's something that comes up a lot. It's just that it just doesn't sound professional enough. It doesn't, and especially you've got to really just put it next to what you're trying to do, and you've got to put it next to it. And if it doesn't sound good enough, you've got to go back and do it. Because I had it with a few bands where I saw them at something like this, and I was like, oh, this is great. And then I heard the record, and it's just terrible. I couldn't do it. And then they sent me instrumentals, and it was like very, very simple. Mistakes being made, like literally in terms of just like distortion, and I had it even with I'm working with an Indonesian artist, and just trying to get the instrumentals was like just took forever. They kept sending me instrumentals, and they're actually the instruments were like out of line, like they'd bounce them, so they'd actually the drums were like not in time, and I was like, literally was being like, at 40 seconds this happens, and it's literally not correct. They were like, no, it's fine. I was like, oh my god. I was like, I can't do anything. Like that's the problem. Like I can't. And nowadays, like most supervisors won't, especially with TV, because it's so tight. They won't accept submissions without instrumentals, just because. And even I've had pictures recently where they want the WAVs like right away, which is usually they ask for it only if it's kind of looking like it's going to go through. But it's just because it saves so much time. Like people are in the mix and they're. Something isn't working, so they need to put something else in it, and I'll get phone calls where it's like, we're literally in the sound edit, like what, can we place, can we go ahead with, is the artist going to be okay with it? And you have to be able to say, yes or no. So
yeah, I think instrumentals now are pretty par for the course. So if you're working with a producer, just tell them right off the bat, I'm going to want instrumentals when I also get like my masters of the full songs. Some are even asking for stems. So if you can, stems can be really tedious to do, but if you can,
for sure, but they're useful for sure. And
so it's sort of, if you can work something out with your producer ahead of time, sort of either like I may ask you for stems and know that they're going to be able to turn those around really quickly.
I think that's a great point, and making sure when you do hire a producer or a mix engineer, make sure part of the deal is that you get an instrumental mix as well. It's really simple for the producer. It's just an extra 5 to 10 minutes to bounce it out. But make sure it's part of your specs when you talk to them, but what you need. Stems are a little more intense because they take hours. If you have a lot of processors going on your mix, it could take 4 to 6 hours to do a big song.
Mm-hmm. And I think, if especially you don't want to have a situation where they, you ask someone for the stems and they've like the hard drive's broken, or they lost them, or you don't want that kind of situation to happen, because with trailers they often want stems the editors really want to play around with the song, but it just depends. A lot of bands, bigger artists won't necessarily give out stems kind of just for someone to mess around with. I think obviously editors don't really care, they're like, especially with trailers, they'll do a lot of looping, like ramping it up at the end, and that's usually kind of acceptable, but you still have to kind of get that agreed. But because editors will just chop it around and to make it work for them, they don't really care that the artist might not be happy with that.
Just make a quick point about independent artists out there. Like one way you can make a lot of bang for your buck is don't be shy and produce your own music if you want, but put a little budget aside and have someone else mix it. Like too many bands just do everything themselves, and especially when you're starting out and you hear mixes mixing is the hardest art form in production. So just paying, like pooling your money together, you can get so much bang for your buck if you outsourced a single to a professional mix engineer. You'd be surprised how much you'd get out of that. So if you want to record it yourself, great, but someone can really polish that. And I don't see very many bands doing that. And when they do, I've done it with my band. Some other artists I've worked with have done it, and it's great. So think about it.
Something I just thought about, which is it's not along the same vein of what we were talking about, but and granted, everyone has limited time these days, but I watch a lot of TV and film in general, and I think if you want to get into this and have your stuff placed, it's a good idea to check out what's out there. Certain networks like the CW, they have a certain type of song, in-flight safety songs, that kind of thing that they'll use, or there's like the Shonda Rhimes type of they use a certain type of song, and it's good to know what that is, because maybe, I think essentially you have to write something and you have to produce something that's genuine to you as an artist. And I wouldn't recommend, producing a record or producing a song in such a way that you think it will get placed. But sometimes you might have a song that, I have a song that's really big on my record, but I do this really stripped back version of it. And it's like, I should record that because I think actually that might be, and that's a really easy thing to do. And I'm aware of the fact that like, the words of the song and the melody might work really well, but not in the way it's produced right now. And so maybe there's an alternative way. And I know that because I watch a shit ton of TV.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to watch TV as a child, so now I'm...
You're making up for it now.
Yeah. Does anyone have any... I think we're sort of... Yeah. Do people have questions?
You got to line up, I think.
Yeah, questions.
Get in line.
I think there's some lovely volunteers who are going to pass around some mics.
Oh, nice.
You don't even need to get up.
Don't even need to get up.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm just wondering, there's a few hip-hop artists here. So, Mark, can you just talk a little bit about hip-hop music and placing it and getting it licensed?
Sure. So with hip-hop, it's obviously, there's the world of sampling, and that's definitely something that we could do a whole panel on, but it's weird. I mean, I think sampling is obviously a lot of hip-hop has founded out of that, and obviously some amazing stuff has happened in that, but obviously from a legal and licensing point of view, it's very complicated, and you can also run into a lot of issues. As I say, we've had it where we've had syncs on the line with big TV networks, and then they've fallen through because there's an uncleared sample in there. There's a website that I was reading an article about. I can't remember her name. There's a woman that is like the queen of sample clearance, and she was mentioning a website that people can upload. There's a load of people uploading old songs that aren't really getting used, and you can download them and then use them in your songs legally, and then you pay like a fee, or you kind of give a writer cut. But it's a really interesting method because she was talking about how that's definitely like an avenue for people to explore because it's completely legal and you're not going to run into these issues where, and especially with hip hop, like you've got multiple writers. If you've got samples in there, you've got lots of different people involved, different percentages. So it's just about getting your house in order, like making sure everyone's on the same page about who's got what percentage. Make sure no one's going to make sure you have agreements signed, that kind of thing, I think is just really kind of crucial.
When you talked about demoing.
Hi. There you are.
Hey.
Say your name and what you are.
I'm Rachel Brooke, and I perform with Curtis Eugene.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, and so you talked about demoing, where you're composing for, like, you kind of get the brief, I'm assuming, and you're composing for that directly. Yep. Are you still working with a sync agent, or are these companies, like, sort of, what are you called, or how do you get set up that a company would, directly source you to be the composer for that?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. You are working with a sync agent to a degree, or a music supervisor, but what I usually see is the companies, they're typically like music services companies. And if you don't know, like if I said the names of them, you wouldn't know them because it's not really something they advertise. But I would look up, and you can talk to me after, some companies that do this kind of stuff and try to get, you could submit your reel and show what you do. And so they're usually music services companies, and they have a music supervisor in-house as well because they do film, TV ads and stuff. And then the ad section is usually like the ad people who talk to the clients and directly. We never talk to the clients. I wish I could because I feel like I could just get this done. But I'm not allowed to because it's a lot of money and it's a very valuable contacts that you don't have access to. But they have a roster of writers, so I'm one of probably 10 at least. Mm-hmm. And I only get called on certain things, so I'm not going to do hip-hop. It'll be more like cinematic, rock, or electro-y, poppy stuff. So yeah, it's music services companies. Supersonic Creative is one in Toronto. Vapor Music in Toronto is another. There's lots. There's lots in Vancouver as well. Of course, all over the States. And there's lots of permutations of that. But that's who I work for. So I get it from that company, and their head contact for that file, like say I'm working on Toyota, will tell me exactly what he wants. And he'll say, the client has not liked this, and he's not liked male vocals, so let's do female, and I'll have to get someone like Gabrielle to the studio. And so I'm always texting people like, Thursday, are you around? And it's like I have a roster of singers. I have to go down the list because it's so last minute. For example, on Friday, I wrote something for Honda that came in at like 11 p.m. on the Thursday night, and it was due at 2 p.m. on the Friday. So I had to write a song.
So you never sleep.
Well, I just decided to sleep and just
He also
started. I
has
just
young
started at
kids.
8 a.m. I was like, I'm just going to wing it because I've been doing it long enough where I'm like, I can wing this. And by 2 p.m., luckily it's Eastern time, so I get till 3.
Nice,
Yeah.
that extra hour. But I think also with them demoing, I think, obviously they're getting hit up like 10 times a day by, I'm a composer and I write this. And it's like, yeah, like add it to the pile. Like you've got to really either find a niche or, start to figure out like what you're good at and what if you, rather than just being, there's millions of composers that write for ads and some of them, you've got to figure out where your kind of speciality lies. Like if you're a great orchestrator or you're, as you say, like you have great connections with singers and again, it's about being professional. Like it's about, as you say, like they call you up on a Thursday, like you're like, yep, I'll get it done. Like it's not a case of like emailing the next day, like, oh, like what's going on? Like, you've got to just get on with it and be, get it over to them really. That's it.
And I think they respect, even if it's not the best work you've done, I think Mark will agree, they respect you doing everything you can to make this happen. So that's more of the minutia, I guess. But what I would say is I'm positive 91% of the work I get is because of my band and people, the awareness of the band, the successes we've had in Canada, people I've met through these conferences and through my band. So one of the best things you can do is continue the work you do with your group and make great music and make great productions, great mixes, cool ideas, and just really just make those sing. And that's probably the best advice you can get as an independent. You can't just go right to a company. They're usually so busy. Unless they're like, oh, I heard you guys were playing in Toronto last week. Okay, that's going to stick. That kind of thing. It's got to be repetition in them hearing about you. That's how you get work. So it repeats itself. You say, oh, I heard about that artist twice. You go check it out. That's usually how it works.
I think collaborating is also a really great way to get your foot in the door. Just sort of, find people that you want to work with, or say you're like, oh well, maybe I'll see if John wants to do a session one day. And I don't know about John, but I will almost always do, and I'll do any session once because you actually really never know what's going to happen in a collaborative session. Sometimes they're amazing. Sometimes you think they're going to be amazing and like nothing happens. Sometimes you're like, I really don't know about this, and that song does really well. So. But being open-minded in that way, and or even just like, in any, what are your strengths? Figure out what those are. Are you good at, top lining or melody, or are you good at production? And, team up with people around you, even if you just start with your friends, but that will lead to networking and other people, because everybody's got friends and contacts and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the concept of like a nuclear song of just within your group is it's not dated, but it's certainly like contemporary writing is like everyone's collaborating with everyone, and it's totally normal, and it's becoming almost essential sometimes. So just I do love a nuclear band who's like living outside of Halifax somewhere making that record. Like I want to hear that record. That's where I come from. But just know that everyone's collaborating. There's no more rules, and just do what you need to do to express your ideas, and don't be afraid to reach out to someone to like collaborate. They'll probably say yes.
Any more questions? Got this guy over here.
Yeah.
It's probably a
just so
good
the audience can
idea.
hear you.
Yeah.
We're old. We can't hear very well.
What?
Sorry, Mark's not old. He is a spring chicken.
just Gavin.
Very old.
Just me and John.
My name's Tim Hatcher. I never heard the term stems before. What does that mean?
I'll take
when
that
you
one. I
ask
can
for
take that. STEM is just, it's very simply, it's just every element in your mix printed with a 0 marker that's consistent for every element. So your drums you have a drum stem mix, it's just the drums. You might have a bass guitar mix, just the bass, and then it's just individual wave files.
Oh, okay.
That someone else could reassemble your mix, and usually you leave the processors on because it's gonna, some of the processors and delays and stuff will kind of have the character of what your sound is, unless they specify otherwise. So
Okay, cool.
that's basically it. And then you just send like 40 wave files to someone else, and they could reassemble. That's how you get your songs mixed by other people as well.
Awesome.
One more. Oh.
Me again. If you get a Factor grant or some sort of big grant that funds your recording, do they take a cut or anything?
No, never.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Because I've received Factor funding for my records, and It's
Oh, good for you. No, I'm just kidding. I have two.
Well,
they're very. I mean,
I
I
applied where there's less competition.
I mean,
back in the
they've been
1800s.
good to me too.
Those application forms.
They give you the money, and it's a loan.
Yeah.
You actually have
it's
to
not a
repay
loan
it.
anymore.
Well, it used to be a loan.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been so long.
Now they just give you
They
money,
just give you
which
the
is
money
amazing.
now. But I didn't. You never really had to pay back. After 2 years, it was forgive. So
I mean, I had to pay back a significant sum, and then they changed it, and that was annoying.
Typical.
Yeah.
Does it come in giant check form?
yeah, it does.
That's nice.
You get a check, and then you
You're like, what
make
can
an
I do
album.
with this?
But yeah, that's a really great question. And no, I think as a policy, they don't.
I mean, I would just read the terms very carefully.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the thing. People
Yeah.
really don't read anything. Like I've had people sign sync deals and then come afterwards and go, "Oh, hang on a minute, it says this," and I'm like, "Yeah." Or people sign their own sync deals and they're like, "Can you read this for me?" And I'm like, "You've signed an exclusive thing that means I can't pitch that song." And they're like, "Whoops." I'm like, "Oh, great." So yeah.
If you don't have a sync agent so when I get a contract, it goes to my sync agent, or I have a songwriting manager. So one of those people will look at that contract, and they'll nitpick and find the little things that maybe they're not happy with. If you don't have that,
Get a lawyer.
you can usually,
Get a lawyer.
or just find a friend who
Get a lawyer. Always get an entertainment lawyer if you're signing significant
yeah.
contract.
But I mean, for a
I've done that
small-
wrong, and I would say get a lawyer.
But if you have I'm just thinking for the artists out there who are being offered $500
Sure.
for their song, they're going to get a lawyer.
Maybe not, but I would.
mean,
I
yeah,
would.
I think,
But you could, there
There's
are, again, this is where friends come in handy. So if you have a friend
Get
who's
a
a
friend lawyer.
manager, or a
Yeah.
friend who's a lawyer,
I'll
or
recommend
a friend
some.
who's a sync agent, or someone
Yeah,
you
I've
met
just-
here.
make
you
friends
know.
with as many lawyers as you can.
I've just found that if you
Just
don't have a
hang
lawyer,
out at the law school.
Yeah.
you'll lose the amount of money the lawyer would cost. It sometimes double that money. You'll lose it. So it's
I think
definitely
there's a
worth
ton of
checking
information
into.
out there. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
There's a ton of information online now, more than ever. Like when I first started in sync, there was really wasn't any information. I mean, I didn't even really know what it was. And then now there's just articles and people write all this stuff down and what to look out for. And I mean, generally most, especially from the major studios, most sync agreements. The thing is, sync agreements vary wildly. They literally vary from a one-page document that someone wrote that's very, very simple through to a 6-7 page what they call boilerplate, where it's literally just tons of legal mumbo jumbo. So it's really tricky because sometimes I get a sync agreement and it's totally fine. They're often really loose in terms of where they'll say we want to use this song is going to be used in this show, and sometimes they don't even say the episode number. So it's well, hang on a minute, technically that means you can just use it throughout, or they'll use really weird wording. So you've got to. That's one thing about just trying to restrict it as much as possible, and especially there's things things aren't defined often. So if you say so I just did an online placement for it was a clothing online spot, and they were using terms versions of this ad, and it's what does that mean? There's no definition. We're seeing that a lot. There's obviously things like that change, and for them they just mean in terms of Snapchat, Instagram, different ratios. That's what they mean, but it's just trying to restrict, making sure people can't just get away with doing anything. So.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're reading it on your own and you have questions, ask those questions, or talk to a friend, and just be do you know about this?
You should recommend Matt Gorman. There's a lawyer who has a Facebook group and he has it for musicians. So his name's Matt Gorman. So look that up, and he would help you guys.
What's his Facebook?
Oh, we gotta
group
wrap it
called?
up?
Do you know?
Yeah, he's also talking today.
Oh, he's talking today.
great.
When is he talking,
Oh.
I
Dana?
have 4.
Okay, so Matt is a great resource for Nova Scotia artists. So yeah, Matt Gorman.
Oh yeah. Okay. I think we have to wrap it up.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
you.
for coming
Thank
out
you for
this
coming
morning.
so early.